Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. It's wonderful to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio and continuing this journey of light and knowledge. In this particular segment of Points of Light Radio, I think you're going to like this one. This is not going to be a normal segment. In this particular segment, I am going to try to answer some of the questions we keep coming up with here on Points of Light Radio. But I'm not going to be just doing the answering myself, put it that way. I'm going to be bringing on various guests. I interviewed them at different times, right? And some of them are going to be repeat guests. Maybe some of them will be brand new. I'm not sure. But I want to start answering some of the questions. Now, prime example, let me get my folder here. One of the questions I asked in one of my segments was, have the rules evolved over time in fraternalism? If you've ever been in a lodge, not all of us have. Okay, now some of this I'm going to be speaking directly to some of my brothers and sisters who are in the more secret societies, our friends in the secret societies, right? But have the rules changed over time, right? Right. Prime example: the lectures, right? Did they have different meaning at the time that they were drawn up, right? The degrees at their inception, was there a different meaning to them, right? You have to understand something. Some of these, if you remember, some of these fraternal orders, some of these secret societies we've been featuring here on Points of Light Radio are as old as, shall we say, the 1600s, 1650, whatever, right? When a degree was drawn up, when a lecture was written down, right, and presented to the initiates, was there a different meaning? Of course, there are things that have evolved over time. For example, today, these were, never mind the internet, this was drawn up before even radio or record players or anything, okay? Any of those kinds of things were ever seen or heard tell of, hundreds of years before, right? Obviously, over time, certain things would have evolved, wouldn't you think, right? And we're also going to talk about, for instance, the third space. Is the third space coming back? Are these lodges, clubs, preceptories, and so on that we've seen featured here on Points of Light Radio, are they prepared to provide that third space? So we're going to be answering this as we go along, okay? I can't wait to get started. I can't wait to bring you this. Now, like I'm saying, I'm doing this now. It may take me a while to bring some of these guests on, but I'm going to do it, okay, over time, and then I'm going to bring this to you, and it'll be little bits and pieces of every interview that I've, every conversation I have with these guests. I can't wait to get started. But are you still searching for the light? Are you still thirsty for knowledge? Then just trim your lamp and follow me. This is about to get interesting. So my very first guest is Steve Dunkelberger. You may remember him from some earlier interviews I've done with him. He's a member of the Oddfellows. He's Order of Muscovites, Fraternal Order of Eagles, Sons of Norway, and so on. There's quite a few to mention. But he talks about some of the evolutionary changes that he has seen, and he also speaks about them from a historical standpoint. But, like I noticed, like, for instance, with some of the degree work that some of these fraternal organizations have, and we've both been in a few of them, you could tell when they drew it up, for instance, it was very religiously based.
Yeah.
It was made in a much, shall we say, and here's a good point, I would say, it was made in a less secular society.
Oh, yes.
Everybody read the Bible in those days in most of the places where these were set up. So people would go, oh, yeah, okay.
Right.
You're talking about Solomon, or you're talking about Jesus, or you're talking about, one of the apostles, or the journey of the Israelites. Okay, got that.
Right.
But nowadays, when some of these youngsters are going through now, who've never been, shall we say, churched, they're like, what?
But yes, the messages and the way that they were written 100, 150 years ago were working off a basis of assumptions that everyone is reading, has already read the same book.
Yeah.
I.e. the Bible or the Torah or, whatever. So it is much the same argument of there is no way that someone in the United States, I would say even Canada, can truly understand Shakespeare, because Shakespeare was written in the Queen's English. There are nuances and cultural references that we don't get through the 400 years. But also, if you don't get all the inside jokes of Shakespeare if you are not a member of the Britannia.
Yeah.
Not a Commonwealth, because that doesn't count. But yeah, so it's the same thing that we get some of the, I would say, if you're at the part that you're getting into degrees of, Solomon biblical reference, you recognize that as a biblical reference, you won't understand the story of Solomon.
No.
So that's what I'm saying. It has changed. That's what I'm saying, that people would not recognize 150 years ago. They would not recognize the lodges today, because we have a different vocabulary, and we have different frame of reference, and we don't go to church on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. That's not, Now, I say that because that's not the rest of the United States.
Yeah.
But that is very much
a lot.
Yeah.
Like even where a lot of these lodges originated from, like the Oddfellows and so on, in Great Britain, most people don't go to church there no more.
Right, yeah.
Church of England is a very, in fact, tiny minority of the British population, like even of.
Oh, me as an Episcopalian, we call it the Episcopalian in the United States.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, but yes. But
yeah. And I think you'll agree with me as well. Certain things, though, the grips, the passwords now, there was a reason they had those. It wasn't just to make sure that you belonged to the lodge. There was a lot of security concerns. Would you not agree? Like even in, shall we say, the last 100 years, where there are countries right now in this world that don't allow any type of lodge activity.
Oh yeah.
It would have totally different meaning. And back when this was coming out, when fraternalism was being drawn up, it had a very different meaning.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, you had for multiple reasons. Back then, during the Middle Ages and things that you would have had government oversight, but it was also a matter of you didn't want people coming in who weren't necessarily members to figure out what you're doing, because they were going to copy it that way. As a member of multiple associations, they are strikingly similar. That is not by accident. That they pilfered from each other. Mm-hmm. And also they wanted to figure out what they're doing and that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I do know, and one thing I did want to ask you is the third space coming back? Lodges used to provide that third space. is the third space coming back? And can lodges provide, shall we say, the third space?
Sure. Yeah. I think that, in, fraternal lodges in the 21st century, we grapple with this, like, well, what does that mean for us now in the light of what we were started as? Because there are some things that we do in fraternal lodges that they're like, well, that's kind of goofy, but that's what makes sense. It has to sort of make sense in the common, what do members need? And if in a particular area, if they need that sort of third space, then yeah, it's possible. Yes.
My next guest needs no introduction. It's my old buddy, Owen Snowden, really. And in this particular segment, he's speaking on the Royal Antediluvian Order of Buffaloes and some of the evolutionary changes that have happened there. Is that part of what's the evolution of the ROB, how it has evolved? Like, without, of course, divulging any secret work or anything, like, you really do feel that some of their degrees, regalia, and, shall we say, the roles have evolved and changed in meaning over time.
Well, yeah, in a sense, you're right. Like, years ago, like, for example, a Roll of Honour, the fourth degree, which is in the Grand Lodge of England, some banners don't recognise it, will recognise it as a fourth degree, but they only know it as it's a degree within, it's an honour. It's not, there's only 3 real degrees in the ROB, but there is a fourth. The fourth is obviously the Roll of Honour, but it is an honour.
Yeah.
But other than that, there's, how can I say, the REOB, like years ago, like the Roll of Honour, like as I was saying, that was, members would stand up when they entered the room and stuff like that. This was far beyond my time. And they would stand up and like, as a sign of respect, because there wasn't very many people who had the honour. Nowadays, as it evolved, everyone started getting it. After 10 years, everyone was starting to get it. And it just become, it's just another long service degree.
Next, you're going to see David Shear. Now, if you recall David Shear from an earlier segment of Points of Light Radio where he shed some light on the Order of Muscovites, right? David Shear has been quite involved in Odd Fellowship for many, many years now, and he's going to shed some light on some of the evolutionary changes within the Odd Fellows since they were formed in around 1730. After which, I will show you a clip of the Museum of Odd Fellowship in Portland, Oregon. So let's go have a look. But do you actually think that when they first drew it up, some of the passwords and things probably had different meanings when they were first drawn up? Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, and as an example with the Odd Fellows, obviously I can't give any details on the passwords, but the degrees during the 1800s were quite a bit different than the degrees that we have today.
Oh.
And as a result of this change, there was a paring down going from 5 degrees after the initiatory to having 3 degrees after the initiatory. And when they did that, one thing that's interesting is the passwords for some of the degrees in no way seem to fit with the degree as it's given today, because the password is related to the way the degree was given in the 1800s.
So there were 5 degrees in the 1800s?
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Now, the other thing is, when Odd Fellowship first started out, there was no encampment, there were no patriarchs militant.
Correct.
Would you say that maybe the nature of the Odd Fellows has changed? Maybe that reflects the fact that maybe people have more spare time today or something than they did when, they have more time to think about stuff like that or get into the extra things?
It was more an expansion of the mission of the Odd Fellows and responding to the times. So, for instance, with the originally, the fraternal orders were primarily concerned with providing safety nets and care for their members. And when the encampment degrees were added, there was much more of an emphasis on bringing this outside of your group and helping to expand the care and services that you give to the stranger, to other people out in the community, and not just to your members.
Interesting. Now, it seems to be that maybe the idea of that third space for people might be making a comeback. Like, while we used to have our family, our lodges, our churches, there was always at least a third space in our lives somewhere. It seems to be that people are looking for a third space again. Now, do you think that lodges are ready to offer that at this point, or are ready to provide that, shall we say, prepared to provide that?
One of the first things that lodges need to do is recognize that the demand is out there, and make themselves ready to provide that. So, as an example, at Peninsula Lodge, we have a museum, and that museum, on weekends, the door is wide open, and it's a nice street with lots of foot traffic, and people wander in, and we get a lot of new members. They come in, they want to know about the lodge and what fraternalism is about. They find out about it in the museum, and they fill out an application. We have, just right at this moment, we have 6 people preparing to have their interview.
Excellent. Well, there you have it, brothers and sisters. Fraternal changes. I don't know about you, not all of my questions were answered, but one thing is certain from this. Change, even within fraternalism, is a constant thing, and I think it's necessary. From what you've seen from Mr. Scheer, sometimes it is necessary, right? We need to open the organizations up right, a little bit, or to move them forward, you have to have that change, right? Right, but that's another question that really wasn't entirely answered here, but how do we move fraternalism forward? Now, you've seen it asked in other segments. Can these organizations, prime example, provide a third space? According to some of my guests, their organization or their lodge is ready, but all of these organizations better be ready to provide a third space for those coming in, right? So I hope you enjoyed this. In the future, I want to bring you another segment called Restore the Brotherhood. How do we make these lodges, the question I will ask there will be how to make these lodges feel more like family, right? Prime example, when a brother or a sister hasn't attended lodge in a while, I think you'll agree with me, there should be someone there to reach out to them and say, where have you been? We miss you, right? Something we'll have to investigate in future segments or in a future segment of Points of Light Radio. But that's all I have time for right now. I do have a guest I'm going to have to be interviewing here in a few minutes. But before I go, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome, as I always say, your comments and input. I do want to see more input, more comments there. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, I hope you've enjoyed this. Like I said, I'm sorry to part with you, but until we meet again, just step into the light.